Happy holidays from Matt and I here at HorseCenter. And Matt, what better way to celebrate the holidays and than to do our year in review show?
And it was quite a year, Brian, with the run up to the Kentucky Derby and the Breeders' Cup. Terrific fillies, terrific turf, terrific colts.
From January to December, folks, the best races on the racetrack. We're going to talk about now here on HorseCenter. Welcome to another edition of HorseCenter, everyone. I am Brian Zipsy, and as always, I have the great pleasure of being joined by my co-host to the East Coast. That's Matt Schiffman. How are you today, Matt?
I'm good, Brian. It certainly seems like 2018 is on the way out, my friend.
Yeah, it's out the door, Matt. We can put a ribbon around 2018, Matt. And for the racing community, it was a pretty wild ride, folks. What we're going to do today is we're going to give our year in review, our HorseCenter year in review. We're going to start in January, go all the way up to December. Matt and I have a lot of fun putting together and doing this show, so I hope you enjoy it too. And Matt, if we're talking January, I think only one name really comes to mind.
That's for sure, Brian. The great gun runner. And looking back at the list that we came up with, and thinking about Gun Runner's victory in his finale in the Pegasus World Cup, I miss that horse this year.
Yeah, Gun Runner was a monster, Matt. In January, of course, we're talking about the Pegasus World Cup, the second edition of the Pegasus World Cup. Matt, Gun Runner was a very good 2-year-old. He was a very good 3-year-old, but at 4, he became a dominant champion. And it continued into his 5-year-old season. He of course, got that one last race in before going off to stud, the Son of Candy ride trained by Steve Asmussen for Winchell Racing. It was his 5th straight Grade 1 victory, and they all came in decisive fashion.
Yeah, they certainly did. 5 Grade 1 wins in a row. And if you go back a little further than that, it was 7 wins out of his final 8 starts. The only non-win was, of course, over in Dubai in the Dubai World Cup. He ended his career just shy of $16 million earned on the track.
Yeah, a horse to remember, Matt. And January was Gun Runner's month, the Pegasus World Cup winner. By the way, those 5 consecutive Grade 1s that he won easily to close out his career, they came in New York, California, Kentucky, and then, of course, Florida. So Gun Runner is our horse to remember from January. Matt, when we go to February, we are really starting to get into the Kentucky Derby swing of things, but we decided on a different angle. We went female in February, and it was our only non-Grade 1 of the year, but the way Monomoy Girl started her 3-year-old season and the way she started out of the starting gate at Fairgrounds in the Rachel Alexandra is worth talking about.
Yes, Brian. The only thing that was typical about the Rachel Alexandra for Monomoy Girl was that she ended up with a victory. And we sure got used to that as the year went along. But, folks, you remember that race with Monomoy Girl. She banged around coming out of the gate. She was in last place, a position that she was not in again the rest of the year, the rest of her career, and she still found a way to win that race, mowed him down, rallied from last to get a victory in what turned out to be just a absolutely phenomenal year, a year in which there were so many good horses, a year in which maybe, I don't know, in some other years, she would be a serious candidate for Horse of the Year with 7 starts this year, 6 wins, 1 second. The only second, of course, was in that cotillion to the stewards in September. But that Rachel Alexandra started out just phenomenal run, capped by a brilliant performance in the Breeders' Cup Distaff.
Yeah, brilliant. Brilliant. A good word for Monomoy Girl, Matt. Monomoy Girl, the daughter of Tapazar. we should have known. Talk about a sign of things to come, because the Rachel Alexandra, you look at it, it's the only grade 2 on her schedule of 7 races, as you mentioned. 6 of them, the final 6 are all grade 1s, but this grade 2 was a nice field down there in New Orleans. And, she's a speed horse. She wants to be on or near the lead. As you mentioned, the start was bad, and she just mowed him down, one going away, and that really got her off to a great season. So for us, February, the biggest story was Monomoy Girls' return to the races. Monomoy Girls overcoming a really bad trip in the Rachel Alexandra to get her great season going. Matt, for March, let's jump right into March, and again, we're gonna hold off on the Kentucky Derby horses. There were some big performances over in Dubai at the end of the month of March. Thunder Snow was huge. Mendelssohn was also huge. But for us, and I think maybe part of it is a little sentimental here, but for us, the most exciting race of March was a little 6-furlong race called the Dubai Golden Shaheen.
And talk about coming from behind to win a race. You can talk about that victory by Monomoy Girl. That was going 2 turns. The come from behind victory that Mind Your Biscuits pulled off in the 6-furlong Golden Shaheen was just mind-boggling and phenomenal. And I will show the stretch run here. And even though we all know what happens, you still have to marvel at the way Mind Your Biscuits gobbled up ground and managed to get the win in there. And Mind Your Biscuits, certainly one of the biggest wins of his career, New York bred, the leading money winner in the history of New York breds, of which there were many, have been many over recent years.
Matt, Mind Your Biscuits, kind of a rags to riches story. The son of Posse, as you mentioned, New York bred for trainer Chad Summers. Wasn't Baffert, wasn't Pletcher, wasn't Brown. It was Chad Summers, Mind Your Biscuits. We knew about him for a few years, and we enjoyed watching him run. He won 2 editions of the Dubai Golden Shaheen, which, of course, was a big reason why he did become the richest all-time New York bred of all time. But watching this race, sometimes it's fun to see a horse win by 10, 15 lengths, 20 lengths, 31 lengths. But it doesn't get much more thrilling than what we saw in the Dubai Golden Shaheen. Frankly, at the quarter pole, it looked like he had no shot. Matt, at the 8th pole, it looked like he had no shot. Somehow, Mind Your Biscuits got up to win this race. XY Jet, Roy H. looked like it was going to come down to them down the stretch, but no, Mind Your Biscuits did it. He's retired, Matt, now, but this is how I'm going to remember Mind Your Biscuits, the New York bred over in Dubai, rolling late to win. That's our March race of the year. Matt, we got to start talking about the Kentucky Derby horses in 2018. And in April, for me, April, more than anything, was about a pair of undefeated colts finally announcing themselves as, hey, I'm the real deal. We're going to start in Arkansas, because I want to talk a little bit about Magnum Moon. Magnum Moon was one of the most beautiful, talking about physical and looks here, was one of the most beautiful horses I saw this year. And he got to the Arkansas Derby undefeated in 3 starts. And he did his thing down here. Now, Matt, the season, as we know, after this didn't go so well for Magnum Moon. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. But Arkansas Derby, Magnum Moon announced himself as a real good horse.
Sure. And one thing that has happened with the Kentucky Derby Trail and the points races and social media is that buzz horses on the Derby Trail appear, and Magnum Moon was certainly one of those buzz horses. He came into the Arkansas Derby having won 3 races, and in the Arkansas Derby put together another big victory, heading into the Kentucky Derby with a perfect 4-for-4 record in what turned out to be the meeting of horses with unbeaten records.
Right, and unfortunately, Magnum Moon did not run at all. There was some trouble. There was the wet track. For whatever reason, Magnum Moon didn't run at all in the Kentucky Derby. So we never know how good Magnum Moon would have become. Of course, he had a very serious injury after the Kentucky Derby in training. And right now he is still convalescing, and they're doing all they can to make sure Magnum Moon lives a long life. But on this day, Magnum Moon was a star, undefeated winner of the Arkansas Derby. And of course, Matt, if we're talking about undefeated Kentucky Derby prep winners, we got to talk about Justify, because maiden race impressive, allowance race impressive. Then he came to the Santa Anita Derby, where he faced a very good Bolt D'Oro. Bolt D'Oro kind of fell off the tracks a little bit, fell off the rails a little bit as the season unfolded. But at this time, Bolt D'Oro was very good, and Justify handed him a defeat in only Justify's third race of his career. Justify announced himself as well in the Santa Anita Derby.
Sure did. So no doubt, even though we talked about Magnum Moon in April, Justify was the other big buzz in April and May and June became the months of Justify. It was all Justify after his impressive win in the Kentucky Derby, and then on his way to Baltimore in the Preakness with a little bit of hysteria with the limping Justify when Baffert walked him around in the stable area at Pimlico, but it didn't matter what Justify did after the Derby. Every motion, everything that he did was a highlight, and that sure continued to Baltimore and then on to Belmont Park.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd be kidding ourselves if we had anybody else in May as the horse of the month other than Justify. The most memorable, the best horse that ran in May, of course, was Justify. The undefeated winner of the Santa Anita Derby came to Churchill Downs to be favored against what looked like a very strong field. Unfortunately, for different reasons, such as Magnum Moon, that field kind of has fizzled out since then. But on Derby Day, there were a lot of horses coming up to the race the right way, and Justify, sloppy track or not, Justify proved best that day, running a fast quarter mile at Churchill Downs, and then being strong down the stretch. And Justify was a very popular winner of the Kentucky Derby the first Saturday in May. And Matt, Apollo's Curse. Hey, he went on to win the Preakness. He went on to keep that undefeated record. He went on to win the second leg of the Triple Crown. But Apollo's Curse was kind of a big deal. We've been talking about Apollo's Curse for a long time. And Justify in the Derby became the first horse in well over 100 years to win the Kentucky Derby without running as a 2-year-old.
Yeah, and just remember how he did it, how he broke Apollo's Curse. He didn't debut until February, and then in the next 4 months ran 6 for 6, including the Triple Crown. So he didn't just break Apollo's Curse. He crushed it.
He crushed it, Matt. So May was about Justify. Who's June about? Well, yeah, June was also about Justify. The month for Justify, unfortunately, became his final race, Matt. But you and I were there. I've had the pleasure of seeing all the Triple Crowns of my lifetime in person, and Justify, it was another special afternoon that day at Belmont Park. We were out in the crowd, if you remember, Matt. We were in the grandstand, and we were soaking up all the electricity, the excitement, the emotion that was in the crowd as Justify crossed the wire first in the Belmont Stakes, becoming only the 13th horse ever to win the Triple Crown, only the second horse to win the Triple Crown while still undefeated, joining Seattle Slew.
Yep, it was quite a run.
That's right. Justify's run ended in early June in the Belmont Stakes, but Matt and I are going to keep going. That's half the year down, Matt. Let's go to the second half of the year. And July, I think people are going to scratch their heads a little bit because Wonder Gadot really didn't keep it going. But at the time, she had run a lot of tough races. She ran a very good Kentucky Oaks. And then at the very end of June, she went up to Canada and she beat the boys in the Queen's Plate, and that was a big win for the American-based 3-0 filly trained by Mark Casse. Then in July, it was almost July, the Queen's Plate, but then in July was actually the Prince of Wales, and she really validated her Queen's Plate win with a big win in the Prince of Wales. And it's almost hard to remember a little bit now, but at this point of the year, with Justify looking like he very well may never race again, and the older horses not quite producing a superstar yet. Wonder Gadot was kind of the talk of the racing world with those two big wins, winning the first two legs of the Triple Crown up in Canada.
Yeah, and Wonder Gadot got in the spotlight a little bit because she was chasing Monomoy Girl a number of times, and had a little bit of bad luck, a lot of seconds, a lot of thirds, a lot of near misses, and was a popular horse for Mark Casse and the Casse Barn, which their horses usually are popular out there, and when she finally broke through and got some wins, she did it against boys. Granted, it was against Canadian breds only, but that was quite. Those were a couple of really great performances, and it was kind of a feel-good story there in the middle of the summer.
Absolutely, and she didn't go. She didn't go a mile and a half on turf for the final leg, the Breeder Stakes of Canada's Triple Crown. Mark Casse went for even a bigger goal, and things did not work out great for her in the Travers Stakes, of course, as we remember, in August. Matt, there was another race in July you wanted to mention because it was part of a really good season, and it was a really terrific race for this Chad Brown there.
Yeah, it was Sister Charlie making her debut in Saratoga, and Sister Charlie, who, as we know, turns out to be the leading American female turf horse with 4 Grade 1 victories, and one of them came in the Diana at Saratoga in July. She only had 1 loss the whole season, and that was to her stablemate 4-Star Crook. So Sister Charlie in July is worth a mention.
Yeah, it's worth a mention for a few reasons. First off, she won all 4 Grade 1 races she ran this year. It'll be interesting to see who gets the Filly and Mare Turf Eclipse Award because she was good all year, and Enable, of course, was magnificent for the one race she ran in America. But also, it was a great finish. It looked like Ultra Brat might get the job done there, and Sister Charlie put the paddle down late to win that Diana at Saratoga. Matt, we talked about the fillies in July. Let's get back to the males. Let's get back to the men, if you will, in August, because Accelerate really looked good the first half of the year. I mean, he won the Santa Anita Handicap. He won the Gold Cup. Even beat some good horses early in the year out in California. He ran a very good race in defeat down in Arkansas. But I think it was the Pacific Classic in August where we took notice of Accelerate as more than just one in the crowd of the older males. He looked like a champion out at Del Mar in the Pacific Classic.
Yeah, and the story of Accelerate, certainly you have to mention that as a younger horse, and even last year, Accelerate was a good horse, won 5 races in the early part of his career, but it wasn't until this year that Accelerate started to take the big races and pile up the purse money into his account. Accelerate swept the big races in California. First the Big Cap, then the Gold Cup, and then the Pacific Classic. That is quite an accomplishment. Accelerate put together the exact same record as Monomoy Girl did this year. 7 starts, 6 wins, 1 second. The only loss that Accelerate had was it was in Oaklawn Park, and as it turns out, that loss came to a heck of a good horse named City of Light.
Yeah, and we were lauding Gunrunner at the beginning of the show for January. Of course, he did it the following January in the Pegasus World Cup, which became this January. But Accelerate's record in 2018 looks a lot like Gunrunner's record in 2017. Yep. So Accelerate had a terrific year, a great year. I think still somewhat underrated year. You know, at 3, he was 3rd in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. At 4, he ran a huge San Diego, leaving some good horses in his wake that day at Del Mar. But at 5, he was age champion by every sense of the word, and the Pacific Classic might have been the best of the bunch. Matt, we had to mention Accelerate in August for that Pacific Classic, but I think there was another big story on the opposite coast, and it involved turf to dirt. It involved a 3-year-old. It involved a young trainer. Catholic Boy looked good on the turf, winning his 2 previous races, but then he got to the Travers for a pretty good, solid field and he got it done in the Midsummer Derby.
Yeah, he certainly did, and absolutely worth a mention because, in that period of time, Catholic horse. We were talking about buzz horses. Catholic Boy was certainly one of the buzz horses as the summer moved along and headed into the fall.
Absolutely. So that's August, Matt. Let's keep on chugging into September. At the time, I think the Woodward was looked at as a weaker than average Woodward, whatever that may mean from recent Woodwards. But I'll tell you what, the Jockey Club Gold Cup, Discreet Lover was in the Woodward. Seeking the Soul, who finished second in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, was in the Woodward. And the horses that actually ran big in the Woodward, talking about Yoshida first and Guinevere, they were right in the picture in the Breeders' Cup Classic later in the year. So let's look back at that Woodward. And just like Catholic Boy, it was turf to dirt. It was even more extremely turf to dirt because Yoshida, for Belmont, the Japanese breeding here, Yoshida had never run on dirt before, and in the Woodward, he came up big.
He sure did, and it was turf to dirt. It was Grade 1. Yoshida won the Grade 1 Turf Classic down in Kentucky, and then the Grade 1 Woodward, as you said, and at the time, maybe, people felt the field wasn't that great, but when you look back at it in the end of the year, like in this end of the year show, as you said, Brian, Guinevere came up huge in the Breeders' Cup Classic, and Yoshida ran a good race in there too. So it's going to be interesting to see Yoshida moving on next year, and it's going to be interesting to see Guinevere down in the Pegasus World Cup.
Absolutely. So it was turf to dirt for Yoshida, but you also wanted to make mention of a turf filly that burst onto the scene a little bit later in the month of September.
Yeah, it's another budding superstar from Chad Brown. Newspaper of Record got her first stakes win in the Miss Grillo in September, and in a Breeders' Cup this year that had some pretty stellar performances in it, maybe more than any other Breeders' Cup of recent years, with Enable in the Classic and City of Light in the Dirt Mile. Newspaper of Records victory in the Juvenile Fillies Turf was spectacular.
Yeah, Newspaper Record was spectacular in her maiden win at Saratoga. September was the Miss Grillo at Belmont. And then, as Matt said, the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies Turf at Churchill Downs. Newspaper Record, who knows how good she is. Hey, Matt, Yoshida and Newspaper Record, what do they have in common? Last year, Yoshida went to Royal Ascot, competed pretty well over there. They're talking about Newspaper of Record this year, 2019, or next year, I guess. We're not quite there yet. Might very well go over as a 3-year-old filly for Chad Brown. So that'll be interesting. Matt, October has become a little bit slower in American racing in recent years. Horses are resting up a little bit for the Breeders' Cup. They're getting a little bit of spacing in before the Breeders' Cup races. So we, folks, Matt and I do watch big races around the world. And Matt, if we're talking about October, we need to talk about Winx. Hey, Matt, 29 wins in a row, 4 straight Cox Blades. That's what Winx accomplished in October this year.
Yeah, I don't care what horse you're talking about, Brian, whether you're talking about Winx or Zenyatta or Cigar or Pepper's Pride or Rapid Redux. Any of these horses that put together these winning streaks, and 29 wins in a row. I don't care who you're running against and at what level, to achieve something like that is phenomenal. And Winx is doing it in Australia against the very best runners over in that country. And I people that are critical of who Winx has run against, hey, I don't want to hear it. What this horse has accomplished, the 4 Cox Plates, 29 in a row, is just phenomenal.
Phenomenal is the right word, Matt. And I'll take it a step farther. Australian turf racing, racing in Australia, which is on the turf, it's pretty good. It compares to American turf racing for sure. And good horses go over there for their big races. Proof of that is this year's Cox Plate. Ben Battle is a horse that we know in Europe and down in Dubai. Ben Battle is a classy horse. Went over there from Europe and ran his race. He was ready for this Cox Plate, and he was second best because Winx was just too good, as she pretty much always is. 29 in a row, some were easier than others. But this 1.25 mile race, Matt, if the Melbourne Cup, of course, which is just a big marathon race, is kind of the Kentucky Derby of Australian racing, the Cox Plate is the closest thing to the Breeders' Cup Classic. I mean, this is a race that is their best weight for age race down there. It's just a big, important race at a distance that suits most horses, 1.25 miles on the turf, and Winx has became the first horse ever to win 4 consecutive, or 4 in total, either way, Cox Plates. So Winx, the marvelous mare, she's 7 now, from Australia. She's talking about next year still. Just a marvel, and that for me was the story of October in racing. But we're going to come back to the United States, Matt, for November. Of course, early November was the Breeders' Cup. And Matt, despite what I just said, coming back to America, I still want to talk about a foreign mare because I thought she was the biggest story of the Breeders' Cup.
Yeah, Untitled we're talking about was seeking to become the first horse ever to win the Arc in Europe, and to many, the Arc is the biggest race, not just in Europe. It's the biggest race, the most prestigious race, a lot of people feel, in the entire world. She won it for the second year in a row. She was coming over here after her second Arc win to try and become the first horse to pull that double, the Arc and the Breeders' Cup Turf.
Yeah, she was the queen of European racing in 2017, the 3-year-old that just dominated all the way through the Arc. She won the Arc easy. But Matt, she missed much of 2018, and you want to talk about what Justified did in under 4 months here, eventually sweeping the Triple Crown. How about what Untitled did, having all that time off, coming back in a race on a synthetic surface as a prep for the Arc, her only prep for the Arc. Then she wins a tough edition of the Arc, and then off only those 2 races, she comes across the Atlantic Ocean and becomes the first horse to win the Arc and Breeders' Cup Classic and Breeders' Cup Turf in the same year. So just a wonderful accomplishment. Plus, it was just wonderful to see how the American fans treated and greeted Untitled over here. They loved her for good reason, and it was a great win, and she got a big battle from another young filly named Magical. So the Breeders' Cup Turf was a wonderful story. Untitled is moving on to 2019. Hey, she's going to go after 3 straight Arcs, Matt, and hopefully she'll come back for her second consecutive Breeders' Cup Turf run. Of course, that was one of many stories at this year's Breeders' Cup, and we need to mention one more, Matt, because Accelerate, all of his graded stakes wins were in California before the Breeders' Cup Classic. Everyone doubted whether he could beat the best, and this might have been our best field top to bottom all year in American racing. Many people wondered if he could get it done away from California. John Sadler still hadn't won a Breeders' Cup race, Matt. Accelerate got it done in the Classic.
He sure did, and he got it done with style. He took care of what you described as a very strong Breeders' Cup Classic field. He took care of it in what turned out to be a pretty easy performance, drew off, and stamped himself as a champion.
He did, and Accelerate had to have a great season in order for the great debate that's going on now, whether it's Justify 6 for 6 with the Triple Crown, but only raced less than 4 months during the year, or Accelerate, who really was good February through November, was very, very good February through November, and beat all the best older horses in the country after Gun Runner's retirement. So Untitled and Accelerate in November for us, folks. And December, well, there haven't been a whole lot of huge stories yet, Matt, but I think December pushes us forward. We still have a chance for something nice to happen. Of course, opening day at Santa Anita's the day after Christmas. But so far in December, I think the biggest story came from the Kentucky Derby wannabes of 2019, and there was one big winner, and it came in the Losail Futurity, and people are really starting to talk about Improbable, and I think with good reason.
Yes, certainly, Brian, and we talked about the about buzz horses when we were talking about the Kentucky Derby with Improbable. It's starting up. Improbable is the horse on the Derby Trail, the newest Bob Baffert horse that everybody's talking about, taking over the conversation in December. Kind of everybody's forgetting about already about Game Winner, the Breeders' Cup Juvenile winner. 4 for 4, has not done anything wrong in his career, but this Improbable seems to be another very impressive one for Bob Baffert.
Absolutely. Bob Baffert, the trainer that won the Triple Crown, the only trainer to win the 2 Triple Crowns, any Triple Crowns in the last 4 decades or so. Same connections as Justify. 3 for 3 for the son of City Zip. Improbable is, well, Matt, let's just say let the buzz begin. That is our 2018 year in review, HorseCenter style. I hope you enjoyed it. Folks, if you haven't yet subscribed to our YouTube channel here at Horse Racing Nation, please do so. And Matt, I got to thank our sponsor, the best contest site out there, Derby Wars. How about you, sir?
And I want to thank our HorseCenter fans. Wish you a continued happy holiday season, a happy new year coming up. Lots of good luck at the wagering windows. And we'll see you next time on HorseCenter. And as always, I want to thank Brett Workman for putting together our show.
Thanks, folks. Thanks to Brett. Merry Christmas.